mute, that would be good. Um, just a quick little intro here. I don't have anything written. I wasn't planning on it because I'm pretty sure that I know our guest today better than anyone that we could bring in here. For those of you that don't know, and if I'm a little bit slow this morning, it would have to do with my day job, night job, whatever you want to call it, outside of speaking, which would be Kansas City Royals broadcaster. We had a game on the West Coast last night, and we're not traveling this year due to COVID. So we're broadcasting out of the stadium here. This is a story in itself, I guess, but the game went 12 innings and it was 4 hours and 40 minutes. So it ended at 1:50 something, and our post-game show started at 1:59, and we made it quick. So I was home by 2:45 and asleep by 3:30. So I'm really glad that I happen to know my guest very well and don't have to do a little research. But I will tell you all that I have never met a better storyteller than Bob Kendrick. There has not been, in my 14 years of hosting pre and post game shows on Royals television, there has not been a more frequent guest that is not a player or a manager or a coach. And I would suggest that I've probably had Bob on more than most players in the history of the show as well. Bob Kendrick is the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. That's what the NLBM stands for here. I tell people all the time that if you're coming to Kansas City, the first place you need to visit, or the one absolute place you need to visit, is the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. If you don't like baseball, I won't ask what's wrong with you, but it's okay, because it's a history museum before it's an actual baseball museum. Civil rights, American history, extremely powerful, extremely well done. And so, as we keep legacy alive, Bob is a direct extension of Buck O'Neil. And I never met Buck O'Neil, unfortunately. It's not a regret. It's just something that I wish I'd arrived in Kansas City earlier. But I feel like I know Buck O'Neil as well as anyone possibly could, not having met the man. And that is, I believe, what Bob does every day. Not just about Buck O'Neil, but all these great men and women that paid dues in the sport and in society. So what I wanted to do in bringing Bob in, and Bob, this might be one of the rare times where you and I don't have a producer in our ear telling us to wrap it up after 3 or 4 minutes. The purpose of this, because we have a lot of speakers on here, is the importance of storytelling. Mm-hmm. But no matter what we do and whatever our profession, storytelling will always help us succeed. And so we can go a little Q&A here, but I'm going to just tee you up on a few things, and I'll push you in a couple directions and let you go where you may. Because I feel like, guys, that some of the stories that you may hear from Bob today, I might have heard 100 times. And usually you would say, oh, I got to hear this again. And I always feel like I'm still hearing it for the first time with Bob, that I could hear it another 100. And then I hope there's another 100 after that. So, at some point, Bob, I will ask you to talk about a light switch. We'll get to that one later. But first off, it's great to have you here, my friend. And I just wanted to kind of ask about, I don't know if you could figure out how many stories in a day you tell, but I think it almost begins from the moment that you wake up to the moment you go to bed, because you're around people all the time, not just like this, walking through the museum, whatever it is. How significant is storytelling in what you do in life, in your profession as president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum?
Well, first of all, Joel, thank you guys for having me this morning and spotlighting the work that we're doing at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, which I think is one of the most important cultural institutions anywhere in the world. And I think one of the greatest baseball history museums anywhere in the world. And as you've heard me say on many occasions, that is with no disrespect to my friends in Cooperstown, New York, at that hollow hall known as the National Baseball Hall of Fame, which is a tremendous place if you like stuff. It is filled with stuff. But what you've touched on is what really makes the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum so important, because it's not the stuff, it's a story. And it's a very powerful, compelling, inspirational story that had escaped the pages of American history books. So countless generations of us went through our formal educations without knowing one of the most significant chapters, not in baseball history, but in American history. And so the storytelling aspect of what I do and what we do as an institution is vitally important. And while I get hailed today as being a pretty decent storyteller, I had the great pleasure of hanging out with whom I think was the greatest storyteller of all time, Buck O'Neill. And I remind people, and I tell people all the time, the smartest thing I ever did was I kept my mouth closed and I listened. Because Joel, there was so much wisdom to be imparted. And I had to chuckle when you said, I've heard these stories maybe hundreds of times and I never get tired of hearing them. It was the same way for me with Buck, because I knew whenever we went somewhere, somebody inevitably to ask him to tell the Nancy story. And Joe Posnanski, my brother, and I would be in the back of the room saying, oh no, not the Nancy story again. We've heard this now about 1,000 times. And every single time when he gets to, I guess you would say, the punchline in the story, both Joe and I are double over in laughter, because the one thing that I admired about Buck, and this is one of many, he was never going to cheat you on a story. It didn't matter how many times he may have told that story, but if he was telling it to you, he was going to tell it to you as if it was the first time he ever told the story. And I try to embody that. And so when I'm in the museum and I'm walking around with our guests and I'm leading this tour, guys, I'm not lying. By the time that I'm done, I'm exhausted. And people will say, well, you're just walking around talking. No, it's far more than walking around and just talking. Because for me, it is about painting a picture. And it is about wanting our guests to feel what this is all about. And someone once related it to a minister delivering his message. And by the time that he's done, he's exhausted. Because that is essentially what we're doing. We're preaching the gospel of the Negro Leagues and the virtues of Old Buck's Museum to anybody and anyone in any place that they will listen. But I relish in it. I absolutely enjoy it. And if I didn't have enough storytelling to do on my own, I signed up to do this crazy podcast that I'm doing now called Black Diamonds, where once a week we're now telling long form stories with my friends over at Sirius XM Radio. And so, matter of fact, when we're done here, I'm going to record another episode on the life of the great Ernie Banks, who began his playing career with the Kansas City Monarchs. And Buck O'Neill would bring Ernie Banks to the Monarchs when he was 19 years old out of Dallas, Texas. And believe it or not, for those of you who are baseball fans, Ernie Banks, Mr. Cub, Mr. Sunshine, Let's Play 2. He was shy and what many would say introverted when he came to the Monarchs. So that effervescent personality that you saw of Ernie Banks, fellas, that's Buck O'Neill. That is Buck O'Neill. That was the influence, Joel, that Buck had on a young Ernie Banks, who would go on to become one of the greatest shortstops in Major League Baseball history, a member of the 500 home run club, and did everything great. But it all began there in the Negro Leagues. And so, yeah, that storytelling piece is so important, because I actually think it helps people better understand the story of the Negro Leagues, and hopefully in that process appreciate what the Negro Leagues represented both on and off the field. And so I delight in telling these stories. I'm thrilled that I have been passed the baton, so to speak, so that we can continue. And Joe, I hope these stories never die. I really do. I hope they never die. Whomever comes after me, I hope they keep these stories alive, because it's important. And when we talk about storytelling, particularly as it relates to African-American culture, that was essentially the way that we learned about ourselves, because we're not there in the pages of American history books. And so it was literally your grandparents or your great-grandparents sitting you down at their feet. And then they tell you, your grandfather say, boy, let me tell you about these ball players you should have seen. and they would start regaling. And so essentially that is how you learned about yourself. And so for me, I'm just embracing what I think is innately a part of me. I never realized that it would become such a big part of who I am, but I certainly absolutely enjoy it.
Well, there's a lot here, and I've now got on my list that we have to tell a story about a light switch, and we're gonna have to mention something about Nancy at some point before we get out of here. We'll of course open it up for questions, maybe in about a half hour or so. But I wanted to. There's so many directions we could go, but I think that, and you know, Frank, that I wrote about you and I wrote about the Negro Leagues in my book, and the chapter on it, I'm not trying to promote that, was about pivot. And the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, like so many of us, had to pivot in the last year and a half. And what I found very fascinating, I don't want to steal your thunder here, is that pivot is something that has been going on in the terms or the world of Negro League baseball players, or now the museum, since the beginning of time. I don't know how many times we've had Bob on the show where something tragic or awful happened, and yet the museum, in the spirit of these Negro leaguers, somehow resiliently survived it and got even better. And to me, that is this past year and a half of the pandemic, where you were all challenged and closed. So what I wanted to ask you was about the resilience and the pivot of the Negro Leagues and their legacy, one, and two, how much storytelling has enabled you at a time where it looked like you were going to go backwards or be in trouble to actually be better than you've ever been right now.
Well, you know, there's an old adage, Joe, that was once told to me, that the good Lord takes care of babies and fools. And I'm not sure which category I fall in, but you know, there seemingly is a little bit of divine intervention that comes into play. And what Joel is referencing is the fact that last year was such an important year for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. The 100th anniversary of the birth of the Negro Leagues. This tremendous milestone that we had been planning for almost 2 years in preparation for, because we knew how great a platform this was going to provide the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. We had planned a year-long celebration, and then coming off that celebration, we were prepared to launch a major fundraising initiative so that we can lay the future sustainability of our great institution. The Negro Leagues Baseball Museum started in such a non-traditional fashion. As each of you well know, most museums start with an endowment or some seed money already in place. Well, we didn't. We're so fond of saying that we started with a hope and a prayer. And yet we've been able to navigate the economic landscape successfully now for 31 years. But it was time now to create that endowment. And so we saw the 100th anniversary celebration as the perfect springboard to launch this fundraising campaign. And so February 13th marked the 100th anniversary. February 13th of 2020 marked the 100th anniversary of the birth of the Negro Leagues. And the leagues, for those of you who may not be aware, the leagues were formed in Kansas City, right around the corner from where the museum currently operates, the Paseo YMCA, which is going to be the home of the future Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center. So we've been actually saving that historic landmark with plans to convert it into an education and research center in memory of old Buck. And so 100 years from the date that the Negro Leagues were signed into existence, we go back into the Paseo YMCA. And y'all, I've got an all-star delegation there side by side with me to commemorate this occasion. I've got the commissioner of Major League Baseball, Rob Manfred, Xavier James, who's the chief operating officer of Major League Baseball's Players Association, the Honorable Quentin Lucas, the mayor of the great city of Kansas City, my dear friend, 8-time Gold Glove winner, Royal Hall of Famer, and now Jackson County Executive Frank White is in attendance. John Sherman, our new owner of the Kansas City Royals is there, and Mike Kehoe, the lieutenant governor of the state of Missouri, all there with us inside the old YMCA where Rube Foster signed these leagues into existence 100 years on that date. Major League Baseball and Major League Baseball Players Association announced a joint $1 million contribution to the museum. And we roll out these plans for this year-long celebration. So we are off to a flying start. And then less than 30 days later, everything comes to a screeching halt, just like that. You know, we shut the museum down on March 14th. And we were fortunate enough that we were able to reopen on June 16th. But as you could well imagine, all of these grandiose plans that we had for this 100th anniversary celebration, they were very quickly falling by the wayside. And I tell people all the time, as a steward of this story, you know that you cannot wallow in self-pity. You would be doing a complete disservice to those who called the Negro Leagues home, because they never cried about the social injustice. They went out and did something about it. You won't let me play with you, I create my own. So you know you can't wallow in self-pity. But y'all, I'd be lying to you if I told you that I wasn't doing a little bit of wallowing, because again, so much was riding on this. And I had this conversation with our fine general manager, Joel Dayton Moore, and we talked about game plans and the ability to execute the game plan. Well, we had the game plan, and now all of a sudden we can't execute the game plan, and it was no fault of our own. And so, yeah, there was a little bit of wallowing going on, but I use a terrible baseball analogy to relate coronavirus to. Coronavirus was that big, nasty right-hander who just threw one high and tight and knocked you down. And so you know you got to get back up. You got to dust yourself off, and you got to get back in the batter's box and try to figure out how you're going to hit that sucker. And so that is what we had to do. But Joel, you touched on what I think is the staple: resiliency. That is the hallmark of what made the Negro League so special. And so somewhere down inside, we knew we had to dig down deep and pull out that resilient spirit. And our team was depending on me. They were going to follow my lead. So if I'm down, they're going to be down. And I knew that. And so, and it's not really part of my personality anyway. So, you know, after a little bit of wallowing, you say, okay, let's figure out a way to make a way. And one of the things, as you would well remember, that was going to be a central part of our 100th anniversary celebration was an in-stadium salute to the Negro Leagues with all 30 Major League teams. It was going to be the first time in the history of Major League Baseball that there was a national day of recognition in honor of the Negro Leagues, where all 30 Major League teams on the same day were going to pay tribute to the Negro Leagues. We had planned in-stadium ceremonies, a tip your cap to the Negro Leagues with players and fans in stadium. Well, it became very apparent. This was going to happen on June 27th of last year. And as you guys probably recall, by June 27th, we didn't even know if and when baseball was coming back, because Major League Baseball and the Players Association was still in very contentious negotiations. And so it was very clear that this National Day of Recognition wasn't going to happen on June 27th. And so I had an epiphany. And every time that I get a bad idea, I call my brother Joe Posnanski. And so I called Joe and I say, Joe, what do you think about a crazy idea to see if we can't do a virtual tip your cap to the Negro Leagues? See if we can't get some fans, maybe a few former current ball players, maybe a few dignitaries who might salute the Negro Leagues by taking a video or posting a photograph of themselves tipping their cap. Well, as you all know, in our sport, there's nothing more honorable that a ball player can do than just a simple tip of the cap. It is the ultimate show of respect. So I'm waiting on Joe to say, Bob, that's crazy, man. We don't have enough time to do that. That's a terrible idea. Well, he didn't say that. He thought it was a great idea. And so he calls his business partner, a guy named Dan McGinn out of the DC area, tremendous communication strategist. and Dan thought it was a good idea. And folks, a week prior to the June 27th date that this national salute was supposed to take place, the three of us go to work. And when we rolled out this campaign on June 29th of last year, we rolled it out with 4 US presidents tipping their cap to the Negro Leagues. President Obama, President Bush, Clinton, and Carter. People like General Colin Powell, groundbreaking, transcending athletes like Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Billie Jean King, Bob Costas, Stephen Colbert, Conan O'Brien. The list just went on and on and on. And guys, when we literally went into outer space and got a tip of the cap from astronaut Chris Cassidy, who just happened to be aboard the International Space Station, we knew then that we had done something pretty doggone special, and the campaign went viral. And then all of a sudden you saw kids in their little league uniforms or in their youth baseball uniforms, and there they were tipping their cap. You know, I don't know if they fully grasped what they were doing, but they were celebrating the fact that they are part of a game that was made possible by those who built the bridge, and they were acknowledging that. I see you. And it just took off, and the level of engagement around this museum started to grow. And then all of a sudden, we take a turn from doom and gloom to moving, as Joe mentioned, to an accelerated level of growth. And by the time we finished this past fiscal year, we had one of the best years in recent Negro League Baseball Museum history. And honestly, some of the stuff that was happening was a little bit embarrassing because we understand how challenging it was for so many folks out there dealing with this crazy pandemic. And here we were having this unprecedented level of success. So yeah, no, I am overjoyed. I told our team I couldn't be more prouder of how we handle what was one of the most dire set of circumstances, you know, that I think any of us have ever experienced. And Joel, we come back a year later, and on March 15th of this year, thanks to our friends over at Hy-Vee, we turned the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum into a COVID-19 vaccination clinic, almost a year from the date that we were shuttered. And I recall feeling a level of vindication because now I felt like we were fighting back. You know, coronavirus had been the bully, had taken our lunch money every day. And now all of a sudden we are fighting back, and we vaccinated over 2,000 people at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And my staff and volunteers went out and canvassed the community and brought them into that culturally enriched confine known as the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, providing that access, but just as importantly, providing a space where they would feel comfortable getting this vaccine. They trust the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And so one of the things that we talk about all the time in this whole process is that while we are a not-for-profit organization, it is so important that we take a leadership role, because that was what made the Negro League special. If you were going to break the Negro Leagues down into 3 key themes, I think it would be this: the importance of economic empowerment, an unprecedented level of leadership that emerged as a result of the formation of these leagues, and then ultimately, as Joe has touched on in the lead into this chat that we're having, the social advancement of America. And then baseball would almost be secondary in this equation because they all knew they could play. They knew they could play. And really, Joe, the major leaguers knew they could play too. It was just the social conditions of our time and fear that prevented them from playing. But no, we were able to take that set of circumstances. And you know, I'm not going to say that we are out of the storm, but we've certainly weathered the storm to this point.
Well, you may never fully be out of the storm because there'll be another one that comes.
There'll be something else.
Well, you know, there's always something.
And I may not be showing it outwardly, but I show it on the inside.
Well, and I know that. Look, I don't think that I have ever seen you show it on the outside, although, I try to put myself in those shoes and say, man, I don't know how Bob can do this again today. And yet you do. And, I wouldn't say that I was hesitant to ask you to do this today because I knew that this would be amazing for this group. And I hope that everyone feels that way. But there have been some times I remember where I texted you after your hero and friend. It's pretty amazing to grow up with a hero and then have that person become your friend.
Yeah.
Hank Aaron passed away, and my producer said to me, "Hey, can we get Bob on?" And I said, "You know what? He's done so much. Let's just leave him alone for a little bit." And you said, "No, no, no, I'll do it." And I said, "No, we can pull it from your appearance on MLB Network or whatever it is." My question, a two-part question here, and then I want to get to a couple of those stories before we open it up to questions, because I think when people hear you tell these stories, they'll be able to learn not just some amazing fun facts and cool stories from a couple legendary Negro Leaguers, but the fact that not everybody has the material that you have.
Mhm.
Not everybody has Satchel Paige or Buck O'Neill to tell a story to. But I believe that if the story is told well, and everybody has a story to tell, that you can reach anyone and you can give them that feel, which is something that, you've been doing that here now for the last half hour. And we haven't even necessarily touched on some of those or on many of those Negro League stories.
Yeah.
So do you have, and maybe this is just, the natural part of you, but I know you've grown as a storyteller too. Do you sort of have in your head, a format or a rhythm to how you deliver stories to certain audiences? That's the first part of the question. And second is, I know this, whether you show it or not, you don't, that you don't have it every day. You can't have that energy that you have every single day, yet it seems like you find it when you're telling those stories. So,
Yeah.
what's kind of the arc, or how do you go about your strategy of telling the story, one, and two, how do you keep up that energy?
You're right. The energy does wane from time to time, but honestly, and maybe this is a little bit of the spillover effect of Buck O'Neill. Once you're in that environment, whether I'm in front of a group, even in a virtual environment like this, or once you are down on the floor and you're meeting our guest, or whatever that set of circumstances, it seems to energize. There is an energy that comes along with it, but I think it has to do with the passion that I have for this story and the belief that I have in this story, so that you want them to feel what this experience is all about. I don't want our guests to ever leave feeling like, well, whoever that guy was, because oftentimes I won't even tell them who I am. I'll just be in the exhibition and I'll walk over and start talking to people. Or if I've got a tour, as you've probably seen, you can start with a couple of people that I'm touring. And by the time that is all over, there may be 30, 40 people who have come and been a part of it. And what I typically do is I give them the eye contact. I let them know that it is okay to come and join in with us. And I try to speak to them. So yeah, there are days when you're tired. There are days, when you're leading an organization like we're attempting to do with the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Every day things don't always go your way. People tell you no. I've been told no a lot. And so, but you don't let a single no stop you. You go back and you get back at it. And so there is a kind of a level of energy that comes along with this. But I do think a bigger part of that is just being around Buck. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier. Buck never cheated you. He never cheated you. And I know there were times when he was tired. The man was 94 years old, and he would give you every ounce of energy that he had in him to make sure that you felt what this experience was all about. And I try as best as I can to embody that. And there's this growing demand on storytelling. I never thought that storytelling would become as profound as it is today. And that's why we talked about the podcast. And because to me, podcasts are essentially long form storytelling. And young people have fallen in love with storytelling. And so many of the people who are listening to Black Diamonds now, these are young baseball fans who are hearing these stories about the Negro Leagues for the very first time. And they are absolutely enthralled by it. And so that kind of motivates you, it feeds you. And again, it is a part of my personality. I guess you can probably tell I was never very shy or introverted either. And so I am a bit of a people person. And so I enjoy that aspect of it very much so.
So it's, we're all always on stage. That in for any of us that are speakers, you're always presenting in some form or another. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't, and that's true for Bob every single moment. He's walking around, and you're walking through the stadium. Perhaps usually when Bob comes to the stadium, oftentimes everybody recognizes him. He's very well dressed, always the best dressed guy. I've given up trying to outdress him when he's on our show. I'm not going to break out my best suit because it's going to suddenly feel like it's not my best suit. But oftentimes when Bob's coming to the stadium, it's with a big smile too, because there's often a check that's coming
Yeah,
with
there's
it.
usually a
Some
check,
kind of
and
right.
everybody know when there's a check involved, I'm smiling.
But there's a story to be told in every single moment. I'm curious how much that storytelling has evolved for you, meaning this, that you've told the Nancy story over 1,000 times or more, on and on, Satchel stories and
The cool Papa Bell story that
cool Papa Bell story,
yeah,
which we're
yeah.
going to get to here in a moment. Let's go there first off, because I think I've heard the cool Papa Bell story, I don't know, over 100 times, and it's my favorite. It's the one that I always cue up Bob with. Uh, how many times did you say that you have told the cool Papa Bell story? How often does it evolve? I'm sure you can do it in your sleep at this point, but I also just kind of wanted everybody to get a feel for the arc of this story, because Bob takes you there. So Bob, tell us about a light switch.
Yeah, no, and I had the great pleasure 2 weeks ago to sit down with our friend Willie Wilson, one of the fastest guys to play in Major League Baseball, to talk about cool Papa Bell. And folks, for those of you who may be hearing the name for the first time or who really don't have a great deal of insight about cool Papa Bell, James Thomas Cool Papa Bell, first and foremost, the greatest nickname in baseball history, bar none. Cool Papa is still believed to be the fastest man to ever play this game. They clocked him circling the bases from home to home in 12 seconds. And so his good friend Satchel Paige would say of Cool that he was so fast, he could walk in a room, turn off the lights, get in bed, pull up the covers before the room went dark. And honestly, that is a true story. And so Satchel and Cool were part of some of the greatest baseball teams of all time. And when they traveled, they were oftentimes roommates. So in this particular instance, Cool gets to the hotel room before Satchel. He walks in the room, turns the light switch on. There's a delay before the light comes on. He turns the light switch off. There's a delay before the light goes off. Cool says, uh-huh. When Satchel gets to the room, Cool is laying waiting for him. Satchel gets into bed. Cool gets up. He says, Roomie, I'm so fast, I can flip this light switch off, run over, hop in bed, cover up before the room gets dark. And Satchel's like, Cool, you fast, but you ain't that fast. And so Cool Papa Bell bet his meal money. And old Satchel took the bait. And in one of the greatest sports pranks of all time, because that light had a shortage in it, Cool was able to flip that light switch off, run over, hop in bed, cover up before the room went completely dark. Satchel was so outdone that he just always told folks that Cool was that fast. But as I remind our guests all the time, you do not have to fictionalize speed of Cool Papa Bell. Cool Papa Bell once stole 175 bases in a less than 200 game season. He twice, honest to God's truth, twice scored from first base on a bunt in exhibition games against Major League All-Stars. So you got to remember plays like the bunt and run, hit and run, created, perfected in the Negro Leagues, later picked up by Major League Baseball. My friend Buck O'Neill says that they were playing in Mexico. And Cool goes from first to third so fast on a single that the Mexican team stopped the game in protest because they swore he had cut across the diamond, that no man could get around the bases that fast. How fast was Cool Papa Bell? The legendary Jesse Owens, who at that time was the fastest man in the world, would never race Cool Papa Bell. Flat out refused to race Cool Papa Bell. Cool Papa Bell says, I challenge Jesse Owens, and Jesse says, I don't have my track shoes. Cool Papa says, I don't have my track shoes either. Let's get it on. And Jesse wanted no part of the legendary James Thomas Cool Papa Bell, the man who is indeed faster than a light switch.
And now you all know why every time I ask Bob to tell that story, because I still smile and get chills every time I hear that one, and I can't wait to hear it again the next time. I mean, it's such an incredible story. And I think Bob, and I want to get to Nancy in a moment too, you know, a lot of these stories, you talk about great storytellers, and Bob referenced his good friend Joe Posnanski. And just for a feel of all of this and these topics, and I think this is where I got hooked when I moved here, because Joe's one of the first people that I met. And when I moved here with my family in 2008 for Royals baseball, Joe's one of the great sports storytellers of his generation, and wrote the book Soul of Baseball. And he followed around for a year Buck O'Neill, as Bob always says, old Buck, and a young Bob Kendrick, well before Bob was president of the Negro Leagues Museum. And he takes you there in this book. As a matter of fact, Bob, I haven't told you this, but I think my daughter has to, she's a junior in high school, her early assignment this year has to do something on a nonfiction book, and I don't know what to do. And she doesn't really like sports a whole lot either, ironically. And my wife said, why don't you read Dad's book? She goes, I'm not reading Dad's book and doing a report on that. She says, how about Soul of Baseball and Buck O'Neill? And so that's what she's doing right now.
That's cool.
Because it's a life lesson book, very
it
much
really
like
is.
the museum.
It really is.
So, you know, Joe Posnanski, one of the great storytellers, Bob Kendrick, one of the great storytellers. I before I get to Nancy, I just want to ask too, like, how you pay attention to everything that's going on every day, because you never know in a minute from now if there's a story that you may be able to use to help sell the museum or promote the museum or do anything that can help the cause.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You know, I for me, this became a passion, Joe, and it became a passion early on, because for those of you who may not know, I started at the museum as a volunteer in 1993. Who knew? Who knew? There is no way that you can even forecast or predict that your path is going to go from being a volunteer to now trying to run this great organization. But I absolutely fell in love with the story, and I fell in love with the athletes who made this story. And I considered myself to be a baseball fan. And here was this entire chapter of baseball and American history that I really did not know very much about. I knew the name Satchel Paige, Cool Papa Bell, Josh Gibson, because these are transcending names. Most baseball fans have at least heard those names. Even if you don't really know how great they were, you've likely heard their name in reference somewhere along the line. But I had no idea about the breadth, the depth, the scope, the magnitude that this history represented both on and off the field. And honestly, y'all, I became engrossed in it. I wanted to learn as much as I could, and I didn't want to keep it to myself. I wanted everybody else to feel the same way that I felt. And then as I started to meet the players, their spirit just grabs hold of you. Because I think we would all likely agree, if they had been bitter, Joe, about anything that transpired in their lives as they were trying to play baseball in this country, I think every one of us would have said, you had every right to be bitter. But to a person I have ever met that played in the Negro Leagues, not one of them harbored any bitterness or any ill will toward anyone who may have attempted to perpetrate something against them. And then, of course, I met Buck. And as I've oftentimes said, once you're bitten by the Buck bug, oh man, it's a wrap. You just wanted to be on Buck's team. The energy, the charisma, the passion that he had for this. And I'll never forget, when I started volunteering in 1993, I'm working at the Kansas City Star at that time. And I am helping promote the museum's first ever traveling exhibition, an exhibition called Discover Greatness. Believe it or not, 28 years later, it is still touring the country. It's at the Yogi Berra Museum as we speak in Montclair, New Jersey, playing to rave reviews. And that was when I first met Buck O'Neil in 1993. And I remember asking him, I said, Buck, what motivated you to want to build a Negro Leagues baseball museum? And Joel, he looks at me and in vintage Buck O'Neil fashion, very succinctly, but also very poignantly, looks at me and says, so that we would be remembered. He didn't want them to be forgotten for what they had done to not only change our game, but to help change our country. And he dedicated the last 16 years of his life tirelessly building this museum and then gallivanting across this country, preaching the gospel of the Negro Leagues and the virtues of his museum to any and everybody who would listen. And guess who's along for the ride? Oh, Bob. And so I guess you could call me a disciple of Buck, because now I get to do the same opportunity. So I do think that it is grounding and making sure that you understand your subject matter, because quite frankly, y'all, I don't see myself as this great museum person. I've evolved into understanding how museums operate. I didn't come into the equation as a museum person, but honestly, I think it aided me because I wasn't. So I had to hear this and learn this from a different perspective, which I think is probably more in line with the people that I'm attempting to reach now. So I was a marketer, a promoter, understanding that you're constantly selling this. And so that's why you want people to feel this. You want every person that steps foot in that museum to walk away and saying, I've gained one of the greatest experiences that I ever could. I recall one day, there was a conference in town and I just happened to walk into the gift shop and there was a young lady standing in the gift shop. And as I so typically do, I'll go over and I didn't even introduce myself. I just as simply asked, did you enjoy the museum? And she looks at me and she says, sir, I hate sports. I think sports are ridiculous, but I just spent 3 hours in your museum and I was absolutely wrong. That's when you know you've hit the mark. And you touched on this earlier. You don't have to be a baseball fan. Now, of course, we believe it's sacrilegious if you're not, but you don't have to be a baseball fan to enjoy out of what you're going to gain when you come to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Because if you are a fan of American history, you're going to love this museum. If you are a fan of the underdog overcoming adversity to go on to greatness, you're going to love this museum. But if you're a baseball fan to boot, oh man, you're in hog heaven. And I tried to take that and I wanted to learn as much as I could. So when these things come about, typically, Joe, I can relate a story to the Negro Leagues to virtually everything that happens, and so you do want to kind of know your craft. You want to know your story. And I'm still learning to this very day. I mean, that's how rich this story is. For me, it's 28 years of involvement with this organization. And I find it just as amazing today as I did when I stepped foot in that little one-room office in 1993, asking where the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum was. And the late Don Motley, who was the executive director, said, son, you're standing in it. And at that time, it was just some pictures on the wall and a dream of building this institution. And I of that dream, and I'm very proud of that.
Well, I mean, that's everything right there. And you just hit on something that I think about all the time. And I think all of us could think about this, those of us that are speakers. I mean, I did a workshop the other day and the executive director is a huge Royals fan. And I love it. And she says, my sister, she works for us too. She hates baseball. She was a little skeptical about you coming. And I said, I want to know what she had to say, because the baseball fans, at least for those of us that do what we do, Bob, or whatever any of us do. That part's easy, but how do you bring everybody in? And you do it through your storytelling. So last thing, and then I want to open it up to questions. I know that I think there's a whole chapter in the book about it. You can tell it how you want, but you referenced Nancy to start. So there are probably some people that are saying, wait, who the heck is Nancy? And I feel like I could take myself back to the time, and I feel like it'd be fun to be out for a night with Satchel Paige and Buck O'Neil, and two men that could charm anyone, but they went about things, I think, in different ways too. So who in the world is Nancy?
Well, Satchel was a star. Satchel was a star. And when you're a star, people are drawn to you. And there were a lot of people drawn to Satchel. Buck was a big star too. And so the Nancy story, and no one can tell it like Buck O'Neil, but Satchel's nickname for Buck was Nancy. And it was derived from an incident that started in South Dakota. As Buck would say, the Monarchs are playing a team down an Indian reservation there in South Dakota when a pretty Indian maiden named Nancy comes up. She has 5 kids with her. She's babysitting, and she comes over and sits behind the Monarchs bench. Well, Satchel Paige had thrown his 3 innings, and he's sitting behind the Monarchs bench. And as Buck would say, I don't know why she did that, because Satchel Paige would talk to a dead tree. And so Satchel is talking to Nancy, and they're hitting it off pretty good. And so after the game, Satchel invites Nancy to come over and the kids to have dinner with the ball players. Nancy accepts. Now, as Buck would say, Satchel and Nancy are really hitting it off. And Satchel says, Nancy, we're going to be in Chicago this weekend. How would you like to come to Chicago as my guest? Well, Nancy says, Satchel, I got some folks in Chicago I haven't seen in a long time. I would love that. Satchel gives her what it takes to get there to Chicago. Well, Buck says they get to Chicago and they're staying on the south side at the Evans Hotel. And Buck says they're down in the restaurant, had a big bay window that looked out on the street, and as Buck would describe, sipping on a little tea, when a cab pulls up and out steps Nancy. Buck says, Satchel, there's Nancy. And so Satchel and the bellman go get Nancy's stuff. They're going to take it up to Satchel's room. Buck is sleeping right next door to Satchel, and the room next door to Buck was vacant. And so they're going to come down and rejoin Buck. Buck say wasn't there 15 minutes later when another cab pulls up, and out steps Lahoma. Lahoma was Satchel's fiance. Buck said, uh-oh. And so Satchel goes and greets Lahoma. He says, Lahoma, Satchel is off with some reporters, but he'll be back presently. Buck goes and gets the bellman. He says, hey man, you go up and you tell Satchel that Lahoma is here. You take Nancy's stuff and put it in the vacant room next to mine. And when you get everything settled, you come back and let me know. Well, 15 minutes later, the bellman comes back and gives Buck the A-OK sign. And so now Satchel, who is supposed to be off with some reporters, he can't come down the stairs. He can't come down the elevator. He goes down the fire escape about a block and a half around the building. He walks into the restaurant. Oh, Lahoma, what a pleasant surprise. It's so great to see you. Well, Buck says they sit down and they have dinner. Joe Lewis came by, spent some time with him. Jesse Owens came by, spent some time with him. Now it's 10 o'clock. They got a double header tomorrow. It's time to go to bed. Satchel, Lahoma, and Buck. Well, Buck says he gets in his room and he can't sleep because he knows that Satchel's got to see Nancy to give her what it takes so that she can get back home and see her folks. He says in about an hour, he hears Satchel's door open. He said, uh-oh, it's going down right now. And so Satchel is at Nancy's door. Nancy, no one answers. Nancy, no one answers. Nancy, and about this time, Buck says Satchel's door open. Now, if Satchel's at Nancy's door, this has to be Lahoma coming out to see what the heck is going on. Buck said he rushes out in the hall. He says, Satchel, are you looking for me? He says, Satchel says, yes, Nancy. What time is the game tomorrow? And from that day on, Satchel had named Buck Nancy, and he was Nancy until the day he died. Satchel and Lahoma would eventually get married. They had 5 beautiful kids. Nancy did the same thing, but Buck earned his nickname Nancy because he got his good friend out of a little hot water that Satchel really didn't need to get in anyway, and he was Nancy till the day he died.
And that right now, right there is, if not the signature story, one of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of incredible stories that give you the feel of a different generation and the power of the Negro Leagues and the legacy of the Negro Leagues. So before we thank Bob and wrap things up in terms of Bob's portion of this, I just want to open it up to questions. I'm happy to facilitate this too, because I think we have a few minutes. If anybody wants to throw a question out there to Bob, you can raise a hand and jump in, virtual or actual hand. Naeem, go for it.
Awesome. Thank you, Joel. Bob, I want to say thank you for being with us today. Powerful messaging. You definitely inspired me. I'm someone that's an avid history buff. And so the Negro League piece have escaped me as well. And so being here in KC Mo, I get an opportunity to learn more. So I'm grateful for having you. I also love what you said about, in reference to the National League, Negro League baseball, of if I can't play with you, then I create my own. I really identify with that. That's something that I've had to do in being someone that has been impacted by mass incarceration over 30 years and creating my own brand in Swag Inc. or Serve, Witness, and Give Guidance, inspirational pieces. And so Joe kind of hit it on the 2 questions I wanted to ask, but I will say this, or ask this rather, what challenges have you navigated through to be able to give this messaging or this storytelling to different audiences?
You know, the challenges have been plentiful. Joel alluded to them, and I go back to 2006 when Buck O'Neil didn't get in the Hall of Fame, and then he passes away the same year. It was a devastating year for me, both personally and professionally. I still carry that with me today. I remind people that I am trying to be more Buck-like. I'm not there yet. I am still a work in progress, and I still get upset every time I think about the fact that they failed to induct Buck O'Neil into the Hall of Fame. He missed by 1 vote in 2006, and it literally set off a tidal wave of anger amongst baseball fans around the world. And Buck, of course, handled it so graciously, to the point that he would push aside his very own disappointment, go to Cooperstown, speak on behalf of 17 others who had gotten in. Every one of them were dead. They didn't have a voice. And there he was speaking for those who didn't have a voice in what I still say today is one of the most selfless acts in American sports history. And then, as you all may remember, a little over 2 months later, Buck O'Neil passed away himself at age 94, a month shy of his 95th birthday. So, I go back and I look at 2006 and the toll that it took on me emotionally, mentally, and to some extent physically, to see my friend not get his coronation when we all believed that he absolutely deserved it. And then to ultimately pass away that year. And at some point, when you understand that his medical situation was pretty dire, you still had to somehow put on a good face and show a level of optimism, because our friends in the media, they have a job to do. They absolutely have a job to do, but they genuinely love Buck O'Neil. And so every day I was getting called, wanting to know and get an update in this. And I knew what the medical profession had said. Now this is in the hands of the good Lord. Ultimately he decides how long we stay and when we leave. And so, but I'm trying to put on a good face, and it was as draining a time for me as ever. Joe mentioned, some of the other challenges in 2018. Someone commits arson at Satchel's house in May, his former home, which you guys probably heard, there's an effort now to restore his former home. And then a month later, someone tries to destroy the Buck O'Neil Education and Research Center. They go into the building and very heinously cut a mainline water pipe and deliberately flooded the building, causing over $500,000 of damage to the building. And I remember coming over, I had just played a round of golf, and I'm at my favorite breakfast spot, Niecy's, eating some grits, like most good country boys do, eating some grits. And I get a call from one of my colleagues saying, hey man, you better get down to the Buck O'Neill Center, right now. And I'm like, what's going on? It's flooded. And I get in, and the fire department was there with these giant squeegees. I mean, just tons of water. There's an old swimming pool in the basement of the building. That was one of the first places that Black folks could swim in Kansas City. It had almost 3 feet of water down in the basement of the building inside the swimming pool. We had put down this custom parquet flooring in the gymnasium that was going to be one of the most amazing event spaces in the city. And as you can well know, water and custom parquet don't go together. And I'm watching this, and my heart literally sunk in my stomach. But then again, you know that you now have to go into a professional mode because this is your job. And so the members of the media were coming. They wanted to get an understanding of how I was feeling. And they said, well, you sure look like you're taking it very well. Well, yeah, outwardly I am. Inside, I was crying. But, and I think people understand the levity of these situations, the emotions of these situations. But, you also realize that you still have a job to do. When Buck died, October 6th of 2006, Joe Posnanski and I talk about this all the time. When I got the news that he had passed away, now I've got to go to work now. Everybody wants to get my feelings and my view about the life and legacy of Buck O'Neill. And after doing this for about 2 hours, we both talked about this because he had to write Buck's obit. And as you know, in the media, they write the obit before you die. If you are a celebrity, they've already started it. So by the time you die, they just finish it. But as Joe said, he could never write Buck's obit. He could not do it. So he had to write this from scratch. And so I'm doing my thing, he's doing his thing. And coincidentally, around the same time, about 1 a.m, is when we both tried to shut it down. And I just remember crying like a baby. Yeah, because everything, the emotion just started to cascade. And then the next day, you got to get up and you've got to get back into a professional mode. And so, yeah, you learn these things, as part of the job. And also, but I think also understanding the job is a very important part of you as well.
Okay, we got time for one more question.
Wow,
and I want to
thank you
Bob.
so much. Thank you for
Naeem,
preserving the legacy of the Negro League. Really appreciate you.
Naeem,
Right.
thank you. Appreciate you. Naeem's got an amazing story too. We all have amazing stories, by the way. But let's go. One more question for Bob, and then I want to let him go because if he's at a hotel in Hot Springs, Arkansas, it's not because he's on vacation. It might be. That's not a knock on Hot Springs. I know Bob spends enough time in hotel rooms. Cappy, I think I saw your hand go up first.
Thank you. So now, Bob, you and I have a connection. I can call you Bougie Bob. Again, I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. The past several years have just been a firestorm of division. And when we create stories and when we take the history that we weren't taught, like the Negro Baseball Leagues, which is just such a phenomenal story. I love that can be a bridge to unity.
Yes. Yes.
I've done a lot of work in civil rights and that sort of thing. I also started my career in nonprofit, so I understand the whole fundraising challenge. I love the story about the hat tipping. That is phenomenal. What else do you do with your team to keep that creative juice running to promote the museum in different ways?
Well, I'm sure they think I'm nuts. They do. I'm sure they think I'm nuts because I've got a crazy idea all the time. But for me, I've never been afraid to try these crazy ideas out because while I hate failing, I hate failing more than I like winning, but I'm not afraid to fail because I think you become stagnant if you get so afraid, you get so locked in that you won't try anything. So when I went to my team back in I think it must have been 2013, and say, guys, we're gonna create a hot dog festival. And I know everybody looked at me like, oh God, he has lost his mind. A hot dog festival? Who in the world gonna come to a hot dog festival? And and so I thought it would be a great idea for us to create a festival that celebrated baseball and hot dogs. After all, what's more American and what's what's more synonymous with baseball than the All-American hot dog? And so we debut what is called the Heart of America Hot Dog Festival. And do you know, before the pandemic, over 10,000 people now come to historic 18th and Vine to celebrate baseball and hot dogs and enjoy live entertainment. I felt like we could create a quality, affordable festival. We operate in the middle of what that was once a prominent African-American community. And like a lot of urban areas, it had died. And so there are still a lot of underserved people there in the district. And that was not lost on me. They can't go do some of the larger festivals. They can't afford to do it. So for me, it was like, okay, can we attach what is a part of our game, the hot dog, to the museum and its history and create something that our community would rally around? And not only have they rallied around it, people are now coming in regionally to come in and eat hot dogs. And maybe because I like hot dogs too. So that may have had something to do with it too. The fact that I love hot dogs. Even to this day, I'll come out to the ballpark and they'll take me down to the crown room, and they got all this fancy food. I don't want any of it. Just give me a hot dog. And so this idea, and now it is one of these anticipated events. We're all a little bit disappointed, as you can well imagine, that the last 2 years, we couldn't do this. Every August, we do the Heart of America Hot Dog Festival, and people come out in groves to enjoy it. And so these crazy ideas kind of ruminate with me all the time. I wake up at night and write them down because I don't want to forget them. And then you try to see if you can get them implemented.
And I'm listening to you tell all that. Copy, thanks for the question. And I see my little sister, good friend, Kiana Sinks on there just smiling at all your ideas because I know she's promoting all those community engagements for the Negro League
She's in
Baseball
trouble
Museum.
because she has to now help implement some of these crazy ideas.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Sorry, Kiana, I'm going to keep poking Bob. Real quick before we let you go, because I saw Bruce raising his hand too, and I didn't mean to cut you off, Bruce. But if you had a quick one, and we're going to make this the last one for Bob, so we can let him go, and then we'll wrap up some of our business. Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, absolutely. A fabulous presentation, Bob, and I love the storytelling. I was reminded of an old Swahili proverb that says, "If you inherit land, you must farm it. If you inherit a story, you must tell it." And I think you're telling a fabulous story that you inherited, and then your inheritance is going to be passing on to others who are going to continue that story, keeping these fabulous, rich stories alive. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for all that you're doing, and your museum is fabulous, and you're only getting started. So congratulations on your first 100 years. Well, in the next, it's upward from here. Yeah, well done.
No, thank you so much. And, Bruce, I feel like we have a great story to tell. And for so many years, that story toiled in anonymity. And so no one really knew the story. And so when people first approached us, when we were coming up with this idea to do a museum, they were like, well, who's going to care about that? No one knows anything about the Negro Leagues. Well, from our perspective and purview, the fact that people didn't know about the Negro Leagues opened up a world of opportunity. I didn't see it as a problem. I saw it as an opportunity because I think we got something that you want to know. You just didn't have a chance to know it. I don't think there was ever a time that people didn't want to know about the history of the Negro Leagues. They just had no way to know about the history of the Negro Leagues. And now we are there to share this story. And we all delight in telling these stories.
Well done.
Bruce, thanks for that comment. Bob, of course, thank you. Hey, what would old Buck have thought about a game that ended at 150 this morning?
Well, as long as the good guys won, I think he'd be okay with it. And so this time the good guys won. So that makes it a little bit easier.
All I know is when we started our post-game show at 1:59 this morning, I said to my partner, Jeff Montgomery, Royals Hall of Famer, Monty, you've always said this. If you're going to stay all night, you might as well win the thing. The other
You got to
side,
win. Yeah.
the other thing
Yeah.
side, which I don't like to say a whole lot, 'cause it can get you in trouble, is if you're going to lose fast. So that didn't work out so well for Seattle last night, but 4 hours and 40 minutes later, here we were. Bob, whatever you're doing in Arkansas, safe travels back. Have a good
Thank you.
weekend. Just want to let everybody know as we let Bob go, if you have not been to the Negro Leagues Museum, check it out. It'll be everything that you've heard today and more. If you have been, I'm guessing you're going to want to go back. If there's any way to support the museum, however it is, whether it be telling others about it, whether it be financially, whatever it is, let's all help and do our part,
Hey, Joel.
because it is an absolute treasure. Yes, Frank.
I think our president has a few words for our guests.
Okay, Frank, Matt. Matt, you're mute. There you go. There
we go. All right. Hey, Bob, I just want to say thank you today, sir. You have been a blessing to us in the NSA community. You are a treasure representing our national treasure. And we just can't thank you enough for being here with us today. Bob, you're just so generous with your time. And I know that Joel has heard those stories over and over and over. But for those of us that have heard it for the first time, let me just say, can't wait to hear them again.
Yeah, that is awesome. That is awesome. No, in all sincerity, thank you guys for having me today. We appreciate the opportunity. And as Joel mentioned, I look forward to seeing you all at Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And if you are so compelled, please consider supporting and joining our efforts to make sure that the legacy of the Negro Leagues plays on long after there are no more Negro Leaguers to attest to what this league was all about.
NLBM.com. Kiana posted it in the message for everyone. Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. The letters that are right on my hat. NLBM.com. Bob, we're gonna let you go because otherwise I'll cue you up on another story, and we'll keep going and going as we often do. So, big round of applause for Bob, and appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you, guys. See y'all soon.
All right, Matt. I think Matt, you're taking over the next portion of this. I know we got a little bit of time left. Or Frank, I'm not sure.
I think Matt's supposed to be doing that. Matt?
Hold on, we got to unmute Matt.
Are we there?
Yes.
You're good.
Awesome. Yeah. Hey, Joel, I want to say thank you, my friend, for being available today to do this interview with Bob. It was fantastic. Loved it so much. Joel, I'd love to ask you just very quickly, and I just want to share with our viewers today a little bit about the National Speakers Association. Thank you for everyone for joining us here today for this presentation. It was designed to hopefully inspire, but also equip you as a speaker. And I have had the pleasure of meeting and getting to know Joel through the National Speakers Association. So I'm asking Joel this kind of off the cuff, but Joel, would you mind sharing just some brief thoughts in terms of why you have chosen to join the NSA and what are some very real and tangible benefits that you've received by being part of the organization?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Great question. You know what? I just real quick for those of you that don't know me, or even a few that do, I've been a television broadcaster for now 26 years. I never, as strange as this might sound, I never thought about speaking as a business other than getting in front of a television camera. And of course, we're all in front of television cameras now at this point, looking into that little green dot of a Zoom call. And so you've all now joined my world of looking into a camera, not knowing who is out there sometimes. But I stumbled into all this accidentally, and very short of the story is I came to realize 4 years ago I could build what I thought was a side hustle and just become a main business even while I'm broadcasting baseball every single day. And I started meeting people, and hey, meet this person to learn more about speaking, and meet this person. And very early on, and she's not on the call today, but one of our members and good friends, Mary Redmond, I was introduced to her, and we had coffee, and she started teaching me some things, and she said, you need to join National Speakers Association. And I had never heard of such a thing before. I didn't even know speaking could be a business. And I said to her, is that really something that would be worth my while? And she very bluntly said to me, I wouldn't have suggested it if it was not. And she was right. And so I think this will be my second year now on the board. I don't envision ever going away. Maybe I will in terms of the board at some point, but I'm happy doing that right now too. But I think for me, the benefits of NSA, one, and I don't want to undersell this, I don't know that it's the main selling point, is just the sort of camaraderie and tribe of it. Because let's be honest, most of our friends don't walk in our shoes in terms of speaking and presenting. As Bob said before, or maybe as I said, I don't know. I mean, we're all storytellers. Every single one of us, as long as there's a story to tell, is a storyteller. But how many of us do that storytelling as a business or for a cause? And what we do in our successes rely on it. So it's really nice when you live in a world, even for me as a broadcaster, there aren't a whole lot of broadcasters that are running a speaking business. And so where do I go to get that encouragement, to get that advice, to get that support? I mean, when my book came out in December, one of the first calls I got was from Frank Clay, and I was ready to hand him over a book, and he said, no, I'm going to buy it. And by the end of the day, he's promoting it on social media and doing all that stuff. And that just came from, friendship and part of the tribe. So that's been a huge thing, is just to have this support system. But, we heard Bob Kendrick saying learning every single day. I mean, I understand this. Bob, it's hard to imagine that Bob could learn any more than he already knows, yet he wants to learn every single day. I feel the same way. I think most of us do. And so there's so many resources on here, everything from techniques and today's storytelling, marketing. We've had a lot of seminars about that, running the business side of this. There's so many elements to this that are often lost. And there's a pretty good chance that in NSA nationally or within our chapter here in Kansas City, Matt, that someone has been through it before, and oftentimes many times. So it is very, very common for me to pick up the phone and call a Lauren Schieffer or call a Steven Iverson and say, man, you guys have been doing this long before I ever knew something like this existed. How would you do this? And here's the really cool thing about it, and I hope I'm not sounding like a salesman or whatever, these are just my experiences, is that in what could be a cutthroat business where people are competing sometimes for the same event, everybody wants to help everyone, and it's really refreshing. That doesn't happen a whole lot in my television world.
Joel, thank you. I know that your story is like so many others, and I think, Frank, are we about ready to wrap up? I just want to share a couple of thoughts before we go.
Yeah, we're done. We're done.
Okay.
I just wanted to personally thank Joel and thank everybody for coming on. Frank Clay, the past president, and we were doing something new, and you guys have really helped us to look at things differently. And that's one of the things I'm about, is that we thought we'd get somebody who was just in the public eye to get everybody to come and join us so that we can share with you what we're doing here at NSA Kansas City. So with that said, I'll turn it over to our president, and he will tell you more about that.
All right, guys, I just want to say thank you for joining us here today. We have a full slate of programming coming up later in this year. In fact, this is kind of our official kickoff for the NSA 2021-2022 programming year. And having Bob kick off our programming year has just been amazing. I want to share with you a couple of things coming up. If you've not been to our website, NSA-KC.org, we have another presentation coming up on the 31st. Michael Port is going to do a presentation. It's going to be kind of a brunch and learn. He has wrote a book called The Referable Speaker. And let me just share a little bit about my experience with the NSA and why I found the NSA. I am a web developer and a creative guy by design. That's my career. but I have found myself getting in front of people doing training, workshops, seminars, and I did not realize the ability that I had as a speaker to be able to turn my knowledge, my experience, and the stories that I have into a profitable business. What NSA can do is exactly what Joel has showed you. It's going to give you a network of individuals that you will be able to lean on, people that have been making their living full-time as a speaker for decades. These are people that are internationally known as a speaker, but you're also going to get the very practical how-to parts of running the business, like Joel mentioned. We have another guest coming up in September. Chris Fuller is going to be talking to us about speaking with leadership. And then in October, I'm excited to bring Frank King, who is a TEDx coach, and he helps people get booked as a TEDx speaker. And so we are bringing some incredible knowledge into our organization that's going to be available to you. Now, I want you to watch your email, because I'm going to be sending out to the group here some opportunities for you to get involved. And specifically, there's going to be a couple of ways. Number one, if you'd like to become a member of the NSA in Kansas City, first thing you must do is become a member of NSA National. Now, I have fabulous news to share, because as of 2021, NSA National has removed a lot of the barriers that would keep someone who is wanting to build a speaking business from joining. In the past, you had to be able to prove revenue to a certain amount in a calendar year to be able to qualify to speak or be a part of NSA National. That has been removed. And so they have opened up access to virtually anyone who wants to develop their speaking business to become a part of National. Now, once you've done that, then you're able to become part of the NSA Kansas City chapter. As a part of the NSA Kansas City chapter, you're going to get access to all of our programming, just like what you've seen today. But in addition to that, you're going to get access to members only mastermind meetings, where we get around at a round table and we talk the nuts and bolts of our business. What is it that we can do practically to grow our business and make it what it should be? We're also going to have tech talks. So you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions related to, what technology do I need to have to present virtually, microphone setup, video setup, presentation software, that sort of thing. You have a place where you can get answers to these technical questions by being a part of the NSA-KC chapter. Now, if that's not appealing to you, then we have a lower offer, which is basically becoming a Friends of NSA-KC, which that would provide you with access to the programming that we're going to do monthly. It's going to create an opportunity for you to leverage that knowledge without all of the members only type content. But that's something that I think is going to be appealing because we are going to be programming this next year with amazing content to help you grow your business. So I would love to have you watch your email. We'll be sending out some information here very soon. If you haven't, go to nsa-kc.org, get signed up for the Brunch and Learn. That's coming up next week. And then we'll be officially kicking off our calendar year. So from myself, Frank Clay, our past president, Jack Mackey, our president-elect, Joel, our board member, who is so gracious today to host today's meeting. Guys, I just want to say thank you for being here today, and I hope you have a fantastic weekend.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Matt,
Yes, sir.
would you hang on just for a few minutes? It's Joe Callan. I'd just love to visit with you for a couple minutes.
Be happy to, Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll stay on for any questions.
Yeah, be happy.